I was 30 seconds away from closing a $500 million deal when my boss fired me for being too expensive. I didn't even hear it from him directly. It was an email, short and smug. Effective immediately, your role has been eliminated. Please return your badge to security. My laptop locked before I could hit send on the final tranche instructions. One click and 5 years of my life vanished off their servers like I'd never existed. If you've ever been blindsided like that, the hollow thud in your chest, it's not rage first. It's not even sadness. It's disbelief, like your brain is buffering while your life falls apart. And yeah, I will tell you exactly how it went down, because I want people to understand what too expensive really meant. I wasn't some pampered exec burning budget on steak dinners. I was the guy who rebuilt a dead pipeline from nothing, who flew coach, who lived on lukewarm coffee and stale conference bagels, while smoothing egos at midnight calls. When I joined, the firm was circling the drain. Their pipeline of acquisitions was a graveyard of non-starters, and the CEO, my boss, was obsessed with optics. He wanted glossy decks, not results. He liked applause in the boardroom, not hard clauses in contracts. So I did the opposite, quietly, patiently. I kept my head down and spent 2 years building relationships with one target, a family-run industrial company bleeding cash, but sitting on irreplaceable infrastructure. Everyone else passed on them. I didn't. I met the founder's wife over diner coffee. I listened to the COO rant about his father's refusal to retire. I built trust, brick by brick. By year 3, we had a draft deal. $500 million total structure, $300 million cash, $200 million earnout tied to performance. The key was a side letter I insisted on, buried in miscellaneous like an afterthought. A change of control clause, written so narrowly, no one but me and our outside counsel seemed to notice. It gave me certain voting rights if leadership at our firm shifted during close. My boss never read it. He never read anything past the press release bullet points. Meanwhile, he loved to remind me how replaceable I was. I wasn't flashy. No Rolex, no Aston Martin selfies. Just a used Toyota, a condo with too much mortgage, and a father whose medical bills ate every bonus I got. Too expensive, he'd mutter, usually after I pushed back on cutting employee benefits or stiffing a vendor. He meant I had principles. He meant I didn't play dumb. And then came closing day. We were in the conference room, long table polished like a mirror, trays of croissants nobody touched. The target founder was nervous, pen tapping against the folder. My team was scattered around, double-checking red lines. The escrow agent was literally refreshing the portal. That's when my email froze. I thought it was the Wi-Fi. Then my phone buzzed. My keycard access revoked. And the message hit. Too expensive. Fired. Effective immediately. I looked across the table at the founder. He had no idea what just happened. He thought I was just taking a call. My boss sat at the head, beaming like he'd already won. He had no clue the entire scaffolding of this deal was built on my relationships, my promises, my word. Without me, it wasn't just numbers on paper. It was ashes. I wanted to scream, to flip the table. But instead, I slid my notebook shut, stood up, and walked out. No drama, no goodbye. Security was already waiting outside the glass doors. One of them, a guy named Marcus, I used to buy coffee for, looked away as he held out his hand for my badge. That was the moment. The humiliation, the injustice, the sense of being disposable in the very machine I had oiled with my own blood. But here's the thing. When you've memorized every clause, when you've sat through every midnight call, when you've carried 5 years on your back, you walk out with more than they think. And that's where this story really starts. You don't rebuild a $500 million deal by accident. You bleed into it. People think M&A is just champagne and closing dinners, but it's mostly fluorescent lights at 2 a.m., bad takeout, and the constant hum of printers that never stop. For 2 years, I lived in that world. Not for prestige, not for glory, for survival, my mortgage, my dad's dialysis bills. The promise I made to my wife that one day we'd stop living like we were 20, even though we were pushing 40. I learned early that my boss didn't care about any of that. He cared about optics. He was addicted to headlines. Firm X secures major acquisition. CEO leads bold expansion. My role? To ghostwrite reality beneath his vanity. He loved to sweep into meetings, crack a joke, and leave with all the credit. But when it came to the ugly work, legal hair-splitting, financial stress tests, babysitting founders through their meltdowns, that was me. Always me. Take diligence, for example. We spent months combing through the target's warehouses. Rusted forklifts, ledgers handwritten in smudged ink, old labor disputes buried in footnotes. I'd sit cross-legged on concrete floors with a flashlight, scanning boxes for invoices that could sink the valuation by 30 hours. My boss never came once, but he sure liked to wave around the polished summary slides later. And the clauses? God, the clauses. You learn to love the details, or you die by them. Earnouts tied to EBITDA margins. Drag-along rights if minority shareholders got cold feet. And the crown jewel, the change of control clause, it sat there like a loaded gun, quiet, ignored. To him, miscellaneous was filler. To me, it was oxygen. Meanwhile, his campaign against me ramped up. He'd smirk across the table when HR mentioned market benchmarks. He once told me, dead serious, "You're a cost center, not a rainmaker." This while I was literally holding together the only deal that would double the firm's assets under management. Too expensive was code for too principled to play dumb. I'll never forget one dinner with the Target's founder, a 62-year-old guy with nicotine-stained fingers, slouched over a plate of pasta. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't trust suits, I trust you. Don't screw me." That hit harder than any comp discussion. That's when I knew this wasn't just about my paycheck, it was about delivering on a human promise. But upstairs, my boss was rehearsing press quotes. Closing week was hell. We slept in conference rooms. Associates rotated shifts like a hospital ER. I taped timelines to the wall. Sharpie scribbled with arrows and color codes. Green, Chachas signed. Yellow, Sach pending. Red, Ast fire. My boss hated the mess. Said it looked unprofessional. But that wall saved us. Everyone knew where we stood at a glance. Then came the petty games. My card access was mysteriously disabled one night. I lost half my emails. HR called me in for a chat about attitude. And through it all, I bit my tongue. Because I knew something he didn't. That side letter gave me teeth. I walked into that final meeting not as an employee, but as a ghost shareholder. My boss thought firing me mid-close erased me. What he didn't realize was that removing me activated the very clause he'd never bothered to read. When security walked me out, I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I let him believe he'd won. But I carried out more than my notebook. I carried knowledge no one else had. The founder's trust, the fine print, and the memory of every late-night call. They thought they'd erased me. In reality, they'd just freed me. 5 years later, that decision would come back to haunt him. When the elevator doors shut behind me that day, I thought it was the end. Truth is, it was the beginning. The fallout hit immediately. My boss strutted into the conference room like a conquering hero, announcing to the founder and the board that I'd been transitioned out due to budget optimization. He used those exact words. The founder's face drained. He didn't say anything then, but he looked at me through the glass as I was escorted past security. That look said everything. Without you, this deal doesn't exist. And he was right. Within a week, the transaction started to wobble. The founder grew skittish. He called me twice on my personal phone just to ask if the promises still stood. Legally, I couldn't say much. I wasn't about to sabotage him, but I told him the truth. I gave you my word. That doesn't change. He sighed long and heavy and said, "Then I'll wait." Meanwhile, my boss spun the narrative. Internally, he bragged that he had cut dead weight. Externally, he posed for glossy magazine interviews about lean leadership. But behind the scenes, the financing syndicate was panicking. The clauses were triggering questions. Lawyers were circling. The founder stalled on signing the final earnout terms. My boss had no idea why. Here's the irony. I didn't lift a finger against him. I didn't leak a memo. I didn't call a single investor. I just disappeared. But disappearing isn't the same as being gone. I went quiet. Rented a tiny office above a laundromat. One desk, one chair, one coffee maker that barely worked. No assistants, no expense accounts, no security badge. Just me, a whiteboard, and a notebook full of numbers. And then I started building. The first year was brutal. I liquidated my retirement account to cover bills. My Toyota broke down twice. I fixed it myself with YouTube tutorials and scraped knuckles. I pitched investors until my throat went raw. 99 no's for every maybe. But one maybe turned into a check. A small one, but enough. That first fund wasn't glamorous. We weren't chasing unicorns. We looked for broken companies with bones worth saving. I stayed up until 4 a.m. modeling cash flows, then dragged myself to pitch breakfasts at 7. My wife would leave me post-it notes on the coffee pot. Keep going. You're closer than you think. By year 2, we had our first win. A distressed logistics firm we turned around and sold for triple. That exit didn't just pay back investors. It bought credibility. Suddenly, LPs who once ignored me were taking my calls. Year 3, another deal. Year 4, another. I didn't get rich overnight, but brick by brick the foundation grew. And all the while, I never forgot that day in the glass conference room, his smirk, the word too expensive. It burned in me, not as rage, but as fuel. Then came year 5. The economy turned. Credit markets tightened. Companies that once strutted now scrambled. And wouldn't you know it, my old firm, his firm, was in trouble. Debt covenants breached, margins collapsing. The same founder from that $500 million deal, still around, still waiting for someone he trusted. The irony was almost too perfect. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it. I just sharpened my pencil, called a few friends, and prepared to walk back into the room I was once kicked out of. Next time, I wouldn't be carrying a notebook. I'd be carrying the paper. 5 years later, I walked back into the same glass lobby where security once stripped me of my badge. Only this time, I wasn't there for a job. I was there to buy the building. The economy had turned vicious. Deals dried up, credit evaporated, and my old firm was bleeding out. They'd over-leveraged themselves chasing headlines, my ex-boss's specialty. Debt covenants cracked. Lenders started circling like vultures. Employees whispered about unpaid bonuses. Vendors waited months for checks. From the outside, the company looked fine. Inside, it was a house of cards. And here's where leverage shifts. When a company can't meet its debt, the people who own the paper own the company. That's what I built toward, quietly, surgically. For months, my fund bought pieces of their debt on the secondary market. Small tranches at first, then bigger chunks. Every dollar we bought was another thread in the rope tightening around his empire. By the time I stepped back into that boardroom, we held enough paper to call shots. My ex-boss didn't know it yet. He looked older, still polished, perfect suit, perfect hair, but his eyes darted too much. He cracked the same rehearsed smile, but his voice carried a tremor. "Glad you could join us," he said, as if this was some friendly reunion. He had no idea I was no longer the guy begging for a raise. I was the guy holding the trigger. The lenders went first. Nervous, shifting in their seats, they laid out the breaches, missed interest payments, liquidity ratios underwater, looming defaults. My ex-boss leaned back, all bravado, and said, "We're negotiating extensions." That's when I pushed my folder forward. "No extensions," I said, calm, measured. "We own the paper." The room froze. He blinked like he hadn't heard me right. "What do you mean, we?" I opened the folder. Inside, transfer notices, signatures, stamped confirmations. Weeks, months of quiet work laid bare in black and white. One by one, the lenders nodded. They weren't the creditors anymore. We were. That's when the color drained from his face. I kept it professional. No gloating, no smirk. I laid out terms: an emergency capital injection to stabilize operations, restructuring of the debt, new governance requirements. It wasn't charity, it was survival. Without us, the firm would sink. With us, it had a chance. And then came the dagger, the change of control clause from the $500 deal he'd stolen from me. Remember the side letter he never read? When his firm merged subsidiaries years back, it triggered that clause. Legally, I had veto rights, and I still did. Consent, I said, sliding the clause across the table. You need mine. He stared at it like it was written in fire. Because it was. The founder from that original deal was on the call too. He spoke up for the first time, his voice gravelly but steady. I trust him, not you. That was the nail. My ex-boss tried to bluster, to threaten lawsuits, to posture, but the math didn't care. The paper didn't care, and the founder didn't care. The room wasn't his anymore. It was mine. That was the day the tables turned. And yet, I didn't finish it there. Because revenge isn't just about taking power back. It's about showing everyone what real leadership looks like. The day of the reckoning didn't look like a movie. No dramatic spotlight, no slow clap. Just a town hall meeting in the same atrium where I'd once been escorted out like a criminal. Employees filled every chair, vendors lined the walls. A few reporters had been tipped off and were already scribbling in their notebooks. My ex-boss sat stiffly at the front, his tie too tight, his jaw grinding so hard you could hear it when the room went quiet. I walked to the mic. No theatrics. No victory lap. Just facts. 5 years ago, I began, I was told I was too expensive. Today I'm here because this firm is worth more than the ego that nearly destroyed it. And the people in this room, the ones who kept showing up while promises broke, deserve better. You could feel the tension snap, heads lifted, eyes widened, because everyone knew exactly what I was talking about, even if I never said his name. I laid out what we were doing: a retention pool to reward employees who had endured unpaid bonuses and late checks. Vendor payments caught up in full, interest included. Health benefits reinstated to pre-cuts. A new governance policy with accountability measures published openly. Every word was a direct reversal of something my ex-boss had once called wasteful. He squirmed in his chair. Finally, he stood up, trying to take back the room. This is unnecessary. The firm has always been run responsibly. The founder from that $500 deal cut him off. His voice carried through the atrium like gravel on steel. No, it hasn't. Not until now. The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some just exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for years. My ex-boss's face flushed red, then pale. He sat down, and then came the moment I'd been waiting for. He leaned toward me, voice low, desperate. Give me a seat at the table. I can help. You know I can. I looked at him for a long time. This was the man who had cut me loose with a smug email, who had paraded around on the work of others, who had called me too expensive while pocketing millions. Now he was begging, so I offered him exactly what he once denied me. You want a seat? Fine. Advisory role? 1 year. Same severance you blocked me from receiving. KPIs tied to mentoring the staff you ignored. Bonus contingent on reimbursing overcharged vendors. You'll earn every cent, or you won't earn at all. His mouth opened, closed. He had no cards left to play. The room was silent, waiting. Finally, he nodded, signed the papers. That was the moment karma stopped being abstract. It was ink on a page, witnessed by everyone he'd wronged. When the meeting ended, employees lined up, not for me, but to shake the founder's hand, to hug each other, to believe in their jobs again. One young analyst whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting us." I told him the truth. I never did. It wasn't revenge with fireworks. It was revenge with receipts. And it was louder than any headline he ever chased. 6 months later, the noise was gone. No cameras, no reporters, no whispers in elevators, just quiet. The firm was stable again. Vendors had been paid. Employees had received their retention bonuses. And for the first time in years, people walked into the building without dreading the day. The atmosphere was lighter, like someone had opened windows that had been sealed shut. My ex-boss, he kept his advisory role. To his credit, he showed up. Not out of pride. Pride had been stripped away, but out of necessity. Every week he sat with junior analysts, walking them through spreadsheets he once dismissed as grunt work. For the first time in his career, he couldn't hide behind press releases or power lunches. His bonus depended on teaching, on listening, on serving. I'd watch from a distance sometimes, not with malice, with a strange kind of curiosity. Here was the man who once thought I was disposable, now taking notes from a coach half his age. Humility doesn't come easy, but I saw flashes of it. When he stopped interrupting, when he stayed after hours to answer a question. He wasn't transformed into a saint, but he was no longer untouchable either. And that was enough. For me, the win wasn't the title or the money. It was the silence, the freedom of not needing to prove anything anymore. I used some of the profits to pay off my mortgage. I rebuilt my dad's old clinic, turning it into a community health center with his name on the door. On Sundays, I'd bring coffee to the security team, the same kind of guys who once had to escort me out. Now, I handed them cups and said, "Thanks for keeping the place standing." One evening, I walked past the glass lobby again, the same one where I had surrendered my badge 5 years earlier. A junior analyst, probably the age I'd been when I first started, was fumbling with his laptop bag at the door. I held it open for him. He nodded, nervous, not realizing who I was. That was the moment I knew the story was over. Not with a headline, not with applause, but with a door quietly held open for someone else. Because the real revenge wasn't humiliating my boss. It was proving that I was never too expensive. I was too valuable for the wrong place. If you've ever been told you weren't worth it, remember this. Sometimes the only way to prove your value is to walk away, build your own table, and come back when you own the paper.